Hi, everyone. This is Nathan with People's Town Hall. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to the simple idea that our democracy is stronger and better when our lawmakers take regular occasion to meet with and listen to the people they work for, which is their constituents. We are here today virtually in Jackson County, Oregon, with Senator Ron Wyden, who I believe is not just virtually in Jackson County, but in there in person. He will be joined by a number of his constituents from Jackson County. And we also hope to take a few of your questions as well, folks who are watching on Facebook or YouTube. So if you are a constituent, add your question, and we'll hope to get to a few of them. Senator Wyden, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nathan. And it's great to be home. I had something of a marathon trek getting to Southern Oregon because I was working on the Russia bill, prescription drug efforts yesterday, and finally went to bed in Central Oregon around 2:15 in the morning. That's like 5:15, and so it's just great. 5:15 in the East is just great to be home. Couple of points. First, I am at the Medford Mail Tribune, and it's so important that we support local journalism. In fact, as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I am one of the ringleaders in the effort to extend tax credits to help our local journalism programs get through this very difficult economic time. I would urge all of you to support your local journalists. It's so important in an era of consolidation. And I just want to start this off with a note of appreciation to the Mail Tribune. I also want to say, I was just at Fred Meyer. I always like to stop at Fred Meyer. I've been to everyone in the state. And I was at Fred Meyer North a little bit ago, and I was really struck by the really long line of folks waiting for pharmacy services. And it rekindles an event I had recently in Southern Oregon at the Ashland Pharmacy. These big insurance companies are really squeezing the pharmacies, and we're losing a lot of our small pharmacies. And I'm very hopeful that we will see the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services provide some relief for our small pharmacies. And what I just saw a few minutes ago really drives home the importance of that. So we can talk about healthcare, and that's always important in the Rogue Valley. I have now had more than 1,000 town hall meetings in my time, having the honor to represent Oregon in the United States Senate. And we're just throwing open the doors of government, the digital doors today, to respond to your questions. We want to thank Nathan and People's Town Hall for making this possible. It's great that we have a really good crowd, Nathan, and no subjects off limits, Jackson County. Let's cover what you're interested in. Thanks.
Terrific. Well, first up, we have Liuba.
Hello, and I thank the organizers of this town hall for letting me speak. And I'd like to thank Senator Ron Wyden for all the stuff that he's done for the Ukraine in the past couple of weeks, and that everybody else has done. And I think, as everybody knows, the Ukraine has suffered an extraordinary amount of damage from bombing and even from infrastructure that they've destroyed to prevent the advance of the Russian troops. And what I'm curious about is, what is the work that's being done regarding reparations in future for the Ukraine, and what is going to be done with all this money that is being sanctioned and that is being taken from the Russian oligarchs? And is there a possibility that that money will be given to the Ukrainian people for reparations?
That is all a good set of questions. We're not anywhere near the point of beginning to address those. What I was working on before I left Washington is I want to make sure, for example, that Jackson County residents with their tax dollars aren't supporting Putin's war machine, because that's in effect what goes on right now. Let me give you an example. If you have an American company doing business in Russia, they pay taxes to the Russian government, but they've traditionally gotten foreign tax credits, which means that your tax dollars are literally going yours and people from Texas and Montana and everywhere else, your tax dollars are going to subsidize Putin's war machine. And I'm determined to cut that off. And also, we will have a vote next week on a bipartisan bill where I was the leader in the Senate to cut off what's called permanent normal trade relations with Russia that gives them very extensive tariff benefits, and they shouldn't be getting those when they are perpetrating these inhumane actions. I think Russia has forfeited the right to get these benefits from the international trade order that was established after World War II. The conflict is not going very well for Mr. Putin. I think Mr. Putin, and I'm not going to get into anything classified. I'm on the Intelligence Committee, and I'm not going to get into anything classified, obviously, but I think Mr. Putin thought he was going to waltz into Ukraine, and all those Ukrainians with family in Russia and the like would be standing there with a bunch of Russian flags, welcoming him to basically take over and install a puppet government. That is not what's going on. And I'll tell you, I was there for the Zelensky speech here a couple of days ago, and I think that has changed the nature of communications by political figures for all time. I was sitting there watching my colleagues, many of whom were crying. These are members of Congress. And I think there is enormous support for the Ukrainian people. And what happened was they tasted freedom. What Putin underestimated was the power of freedom. And we're certainly going to get to those questions of reparations. Frankly, right now, I just would like to help with refugees from the Ukraine. It's a terrific way to start. And as chairman of the Finance Committee, I'm very much involved in the effort to tighten the economic noose around Putin and his allies.
Great. Thanks for the question, Lioba. Next up, we have Priscilla. Priscilla Weber.
Senator Wyden, my question is more local. It concerns rural broadband and internet issues. I live in the little Applegate part of the Applegate Valley, and out here we are in what we call a telecommunications dead zone. None of us have effective cell service. Almost none of us have anywhere near good enough broadband. And we have completely unreliable landlines. So we're in kind of a pickle. And that's why we're so grateful to you and your colleagues for passing the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund initiative recently. But we are concerned that the impenetrable maps, the RDOF maps, and the online resources about who bid on our road, how they propose to implement high speed, et cetera, really makes it impossible to keep track of whether the promise of RDOF and good broadband will become a reality. It would help us a lot if we knew that there either is someone knowledgeable on your staff who's available for us to get help with in monitoring this project, or someone outside your staff with facility in navigating this maze who we can call on so that we can monitor what's going on. Frankly, the rumors are rife. We hear that some of the carriers want to substitute something completely unworkable out here for fiber optic. And we're concerned that once again, we may be the rural folks in the sparsely populated areas who do not, in fact, get good fiber optic broadband, which would be particularly ironic since we're supposed to be the ones who benefit from it. So any assurances you can give us about what help we might get with monitoring would be deeply appreciated. And thank you very much.
Well, this fight to get broadband into rural communities has been the longest running battle since the Trojan War. And I am particularly troubled about the fact that folks in the Applegate Valley and other rural and rugged areas of Jackson just seem to face one obstacle after another to get broadband. And there are real world consequences here. I mean, roadblocks to kids' education, jobs, innovations in telehealth. I'll give you an example. in the new omnibus bill, I was able to get an expansion of telehealth to what's called audio only. You know why I had to get audio only? Because there is so much foot dragging on broadband. And communities were saying, Ron, you're the chairman of this committee. We're glad you're helping getting broadband, but we want something right now. And we were able to get help with audio only. So I see this as my job to get broadband dollars into every nook and cranny of rural Oregon. And I'm going to assign Molly McCarthy of my office to work with you on this. She lives here in the community, work with you every step of the way. She's from this area, and she will work with you because the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund's got the potential to be a huge game changer. Last year, the FCC awarded Hunter $19.2 million in the fund to deploy broadband around Southern Oregon, but folks are still telling me, and I hear this everywhere I go in Southern Oregon, we still are bumping up against one kind of glitch or another. So Molly McCarthy from our office will be available. We'll make sure everybody in the community has a phone, has an email, the ability to be in touch with her, and we will just walk through all of the issues that are being pushed in front of folks in the Applegate Valley and rural Oregon with respect to broadband access. The federal government, we all know, can be a big bureaucracy. So you said, who will work on it in your office? Well, I'm telling you, it's going to be Molly and me. And I will get on the phone and walk the federal agencies through until you get this. And the other day, I had some people in Toledo who are having problems because they were going to be put out in the rain in their housing. It was a complicated issue, but by the end of the day, I got the head of the Internal Revenue Service on the phone, and the people weren't going to lose their housing. So that's what I have to do, is just walk people through these bureaucratic snafus, and I'm determined to do it. I'm not going to let, the Applegate Valley be some kind of communication sacrifice zone. This has gone on too long.
Thank you.
Okay, to be continued. Okay, was I so exuberant? We'll try the. All right. Okay. I'll pound as many tables as it takes to get the Applegate Valley a fair shake on broadband.
Great. So next up, we have Gabriel.
Hi, Senator. I'm Gabriel Howe, Executive Director for Siskiyou Mountain Club, a nonprofit partner of the U.S. Forest Service. So I'm sure you can imagine how the Great American Outdoors Act was a real breath of fresh air to me. This is exactly the type of sustained investment that our public lands need. But the rollout of this law has been shaky at best, and the situation in Southwest Oregon is still dire. Campgrounds are shuttered, picnic areas are rotting, trailheads are thrashed, and the same places that inspired me as a child to love our public lands and serve them, I won't bring my own kids to on a busy weekend because I'm worried that our car could be broken into, that they would witness a violent altercation or worse. We're losing access to our public lands. And after over 12 years of doing this work, Senator, I've learned that money alone cannot fix these problems. And it's in how the bureaucracy is hardwired. For example, I understand that when our local forest supervisor is evaluated by the regional forester of Region 6 on their performance, recreation is not a part of that discussion. 4 elements drive that performance review: board footage produced, how many acres of forest burned that season, how many fires were kept small, and how many acres were treated. As long as recreation is not wired into the priorities of top decision makers, it will always be an afterthought of the Forest Service. Senator, I'm eager to hear specific ideas about what you and your office can do in the short term to help fix some of that wiring and ensure this legislation is rolled out as intended? What can you do to make sure that the Forest Service not only has enough money, but has mandates to make recreation a real priority? Also, please note that I would be willing personally to help in whatever way I could.
Oh, first of all, recreation is a big economic engine for our state. It has brought billions and billions of dollars to Oregon, and it's a big economic multiplier. As you know, you have guides and various kinds of businesses and folks coming in and using hotels and restaurants and the like. It's a really big economic multiplier. And we saw, for example, during the pandemic, this was one of the leading areas in terms of actually bringing dollars to communities, because people all wanted to be outdoors and fresh air and enjoy Oregon. And my sense is that, and I've got another related bill, the River Democracy Act, which is designed to try to make it more attractive to promote recreation as it relates to rivers, that the agencies are still playing catch-up ball to the new realities. Now, who told you that there was nothing in the evaluation system that involved looking at recreation? Do you have some piece of paper or document or something?
I'm not going to disclose that. I work close to the inside of the Forest Service, and that's what I understand.
Well, let's do this. Because I do a lot of work with whistleblowers. That's how I get a lot of my information. Just make sure somebody gets me a document or something that I can follow up, because I'd like to have something that would give me some hard evidence that it's happening. By the way, I'm going to check, for example, to see if it's even one of the criteria for evaluating somebody, because that troubles me greatly that there's a possibility that it's not. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure recreation is a part of it. Now, this is not something I just came to in the last 20 minutes. On my watch, Oregon now has the most rivers protected miles in the lower 48. The only state that has more rivers protected is Alaska. So I feel very strongly about it. You get to Nathan a phone number, email, and the like. We'll follow it up and have somebody get me a plain piece of paper in a plain bag and tells me the proof you've got, and I'll walk it through the bureaucracy myself. Okay?
I appreciate that, Senator. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for joining us, Gabriel. Next up, we have John Curtis.
Senator Wyden, I'm so pleased that you focused attention on the nation's mental health crisis in the Senate Finance Committee, and thank you. Mental health counselors and marriage family therapists are the majority of mental health providers in Jackson County. Medicaid and most other insurers reimburse these providers, but not Medicare. Jackson County has many retirees who, like me, depend on Medicare to pay for mental health, but it is excruciatingly difficult to schedule appointments and wait months to see one of the few eligible providers here. The Mental Health Access Improvement Act, Senate Bill 828, would authorize mental health counselors and marriage family therapists to be reimbursed by Medicare. Can you assure Jackson County and the nation that the Mental Health Access Improvement Act will be included in the mental health package that will come out of the Finance Committee later this spring?
I very much want to see an increase in those providers. I also want to see an increase in licensed social workers, and I want to see an increase in psychiatrists. Let's unpack this and we'll talk about it. We knew that the mental health situation was dire before the pandemic. It has now soared several-fold in terms of claims and the like. And the head person, the point person for the federal government is the Surgeon General. And he actually testified to the committee recently that now, on average, from the time symptoms are diagnosed till the time someone gets treatment, on average is 11 years. We would never allow that for physical health. So we've got a lot of work to do here. The bill that you're talking about, Medicare, clearly is deficient. By the way, Medicaid is doing better than Medicare. And I've looked to Medicaid in the future. You may be aware that in the spring of last year, I got $1 billion for the CAHOOTS program, which allows mental health professionals and law enforcement people to work together on these very challenging situations in the streets, so that in effect, if it's a mental health challenge, out go the mental health counselors. If it's law enforcement, the police are playing a role in terms of handling that. And I'm very hopeful that Jackson County will look to that kind of model. Since it's Medicaid, 85% of it is covered by the federal government. So if Jackson County goes that route, they'll go through the state of Oregon, the Department of Human Resources, and be eligible for very substantial funding. So we're going to work on workforce issues. We're going to pay special attention to young people. Trace Terrell of Lapine High School testified to the committee about 2 weeks ago that 80% of the cases at Lapine High School that are referred to mental health professionals, nobody ever picks up on them. So those kids just, don't get services. So we got young people, we have older people, particularly ones who've been isolated, and veterans. And I'll close with this. There's a law on the books that says that mental health and physical health are supposed to get parity. I think it is honored more in the breach than in the observance by these insurance companies. And I've directed the federal agencies to get us the reports we need, because we're going to crack down on that kind of abuse as well in our efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today, John. Next up, we have Marion.
Hi, Senator Wyden. I don't have a camera, so you're not going to see my face, but I have my pictures up there. Thank you very much for the River Democracy Act. And I want to let you know that I fully support all the additional rivers in the Applegate that were nominated. My question is in relationship to the Integrated Vegetative Management Plan that the BLM has just approved. I'm concerned about it because it's mainly impacted public involvement. It sort of cuts the public out of public lands. And it also seems that the way that they're going to cut the forest, it's going to increase fire danger and increase problems for the spotted owl. And overall, it just doesn't seem like the best plan. And I don't know how familiar you are with it, but
no, I'm very up on it. What I'm really hoping is Southern Oregon and the Rogue Valley will give me some examples where the community has evidence that BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, isn't following the science. As you know, this is about forest management across Southern Oregon. It's things like prescribed fire, fuels reduction, thinning, habitat restoration. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill is my legislation to expand prescribed burns. So I'm very interested in this. And can you give me some examples? I guess it's called the IVM, the Integrated Vegetation Management operation. Can you give me some examples where you think BLM is not following the science?
well, there's two proposed sales or cuts up over in Williams. One is the Penn Butte and one is the Lake Mungers. And those, the BLM just hasn't been very transparent at all with anyone about what they're doing or how they're going to do it. And it's just sort of a problem. It's like they put up roadblocks against the public to find out anything about what's going to happen up there.
So you think we ought to go looking at the Williams projects?
Yeah, those are two of them.
We will. We will do that.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Marion. Next up, we have David Lane. David, feel free to unmute if you're with us.
There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you.
Yes.
So, Senator Wyden, thank you so much for coming to our county today. I live in a very progressive condominium with a fairly large association. And in fact, nearly 50% of the people who are viewing us today are fellow residents from Mountain Meadows retirement community. A couple of years ago, one of our buildings needed a roof replaced, and we thought, wow, what a wonderful time to also add some solar panels. And we got our bid, and for a beginning setup, it was going to run right around $50,000. And we asked our attorney, and unfortunately, she said that there were actually two different reasons in the IRS code that we wouldn't be able to afford it. One was that by law, and I think this is federal, communities of our sort are not able to take on a tax burden, a burden for more than 1 year. So we couldn't get a loan because we couldn't pay back in 1 year. And the second problem was that condominiums associations, if they get gifts, so if we had asked the people living here to help fund it, then we would have had to pay tax on those gifts. And again, making it much more difficult to be able to fund this. And I'm just wondering if with all of the other really big legislation going on, if you could slip some kind of a way around this into that and allow us, and of course, every other condominium association in the country to be able to take on a debt burden as long as it's for some type of solar or I'm losing my words here for the good cause of trying to affect climate change.
Both of the statements your lawyer made strike me as, just from the seat of my pants, pretty unusual. I've not heard of that. And before one talks about slipping things into legislation or something, I'm a big transparency guy, and we have debates about these kinds of things. But as I told you, in Toledo, where there were 10 families here recently, and they were about to, be put out in the winter, rain, I stepped in and took it all the way up to the IRS commissioner, and we corrected it within 24 hours. And the Oregon landlord tenant laws are applying, and these people's problems been resolved. So if you could get this to me, we'll get on it right away. And I'm not familiar with a law that says you have to pay something back within a year, because we all take out mortgages, for example. This strikes me as a little unusual. So do you have any paper from your lawyer that I can review?
I will find that, and I will send it to
Molly McCarthy. If you give us your name and number, we'll be back at you very quickly.
All right.
I've never heard of something where people have to pay it all back within a year. Now, maybe there is some unusual kind of interpretation of something involving a condominium, but I don't like the sounds of that either.
All right.
Okay.
I will get this to Molly then. Thank you.
Good. Very good.
Great. Thanks for raising the issue, David. So we are going to go to some of our online questions. We have a question about the status of the person online says the SSI Restoration Act, which I believe he's referring to the Supplemental Security Income Restoration Act of 2021. Are you familiar with this bill, Senator?
Yes. And this involves the fact that a lot of the people on SSI, particularly with rising food, rent, and gas, are just constantly going into the hole. And these are some of the most vulnerable people in our society. In my experiences, particularly when you're talking about older people, people who are eligible for Medicare and Medicaid and or dual eligibles and folks on SSI, they're particularly vulnerable, particularly during a time of the pandemic, and they get sick and very often need institutional care, which is more expensive and can also die. So this is legislation to try to make sure that people on SSI in a time when budgets for elders are particularly stressed for the reasons that I talk about, that those folks don't reach the point where they simply can't pay for essentials. Let me just give you an example. On Wednesday last, we had a hearing on prescription drugs in the Senate Finance Committee. And I held up a Humira pen. And that's something that helps people, older people and others, fight rheumatoid arthritis. And I went through the price in the United States, which we can get everybody the exact amount, but it was something like 4 times in the United States what the price was in Quebec, Canada. So we're pushing very hard to, again, provide relief to people who are vulnerable. And my legislation to lift the restrictions so Medicare could bargain to hold down the cost of medicine, plus helping the small pharmacies, would really give seniors in the Rogue Valley some relief.
Great. Well, thanks for the question. We have a question from, I believe, Dasha, who asks, how do we protect voting rights? No bills have passed yet this Congress.
I have told folks at these meetings that protecting democracy requires protecting the vote. And I'm the first United States Senator in America to be elected completely by mail. By the way, Gordon Smith, a Republican, was the second United States Senator to be elected by mail. My friend, Dennis Richardson, the late Secretary of State, who was from the Rogue Valley, would always smile and tell me he was about as conservative as anybody around. And he told Donald Trump he was wrong about Trump's claim that Oregon's vote by mail was riddled by fraud. That's Dennis Richardson telling Donald Trump he was off base. And so, my hope is we'll expand the franchise rather than take it away. And obviously a number of states are not going in that direction. They've already moved to retreat in terms of access to the vote, including restrictions on vote by mail. And I just hope that more Republicans in the United States Senate and legislatures around the country will follow the model of Dennis Richardson of the Rogue Valley, who is willing to look at the hard facts. He told me that. He said point blank, I looked at the facts. I looked at the evidence. I didn't buy into anybody's politics. I looked at the evidence, and Oregon's vote by mail was not tainted by fraud. So that was what I talked about in my floor speech, is we've got to get Republicans, particularly in the United States Senate, where we've been close to protecting the vote, to look at some of the evidence produced by other leaders like Dennis Richardson.
Great. Thanks for the question, Dasha. We have a question from Sunny, who asks, childcare is such an urgent need in our area. Nearly 80% of our under 5 population cannot access affordable quality childcare. Oregon has some of the highest costs in the country. What are we currently doing at the federal level to help families access the childcare they need?
Not enough, I'll tell you that. And Nathan and folks who are following this discussion, you won't hear Democrats say very often that they're supply-siders. But when it comes to childcare, you bet I'm a supply-sider. We need to increase the supply, because right now the supply isn't close to meeting the demand. You've got this very constrained market that bumps up the prices, and the problem gets worse. Now, some of the options, particularly, Nathan, in the short term, are just common sense. For example, in talking to churches, a number of churches have indicated that they have, for example, basements and the like, and for a really small amount of money, they could retool those basements and take some of the youngsters, even youngsters who are part of the church, and help the parents as they try to juggle these schedules. So we're working as part of the next version of what is called, what used to be called Build Back Better. It will have another name in order to try to help with childcare, and I'm very strongly in support of that.
Terrific. Thanks for the question. We've got one from Stuart, and I'm going to paraphrase Stuart a little bit, but is asking about the deluge of robocalls, not just deceptive practices, distraction, clogging phone lines, interference for emergency calls. I'm editorializing, but in such a polarized political environment, I've never met anyone who likes robocalls, Republican, Democrat, in between. What can the federal government do about something that I think is 100% unpopular? Yeah,
100% is right. There is no robocall loving caucus in Washington, D.C. Everybody hears from folks how frustrated they are, and they always come right at the dinner hour when you're trying to spend a little quiet time with family. It's just the worst. Now, the federal government has tightened up, once again, the penalties and investigative resources to restrict this. Part of the problem, in my view, Nathan, is getting to be that the calls are increasingly coming from outside the United States. In other words, they're coming from various places that can be thousands of miles away from the Rogue Valley. So if folks can get us any kind of numbers, any kind of communications from some of these outfits, we'll follow them up, because I'm one who feels, particularly as you look at technology and the internet and the like, we have to recognize that these kinds of investigations can't stop just at our national shores, because a lot of these really sleazy characters just leave the United States and go elsewhere and place their calls from someplace that nobody ever has heard of in the Rogue Valley, but they're just as disruptive.
Great. Well, appreciate the question from Stuart. So we have a question from Kat, who says, I'm concerned about the potential of mining lithium in Eastern Oregon. Mining lithium or any other mineral causes damage. I'm going to paraphrase Kat's question as well. Fixing the damage later is rarely, if ever, possible. Senator, how can we balance those concerns about damage to our lands with the value that lithium has in so many modern appliances?
You probably have picked up a little blurb or two in the news about my lithium bill, which of course has a number of objectives. I don't want us to be dependent on foreigners for critical minerals, and I want us to be able to get those minerals domestically, because they're so important in terms of batteries and electric vehicles and a lot of the things that are going to move us towards renewable energy. They're a pretty good complement to my Clean Energy for America bill, which passed the Senate Finance Committee and would say for the first time that the more you reduce carbon emissions, the bigger your tax savings. Now, you've asked about the question of environmental protection. We'll be happy to send you the bill. It's not a super long bill, but it has a provision that stipulates that no environmental law or rule can be waived in the course of going forward with lithium development. By the way, southeastern Oregon is considered one of the largest sources of lithium. And so this would be a chance to also create some opportunities for rural Oregon employment. Take a look at the bill, Kat. Let me know what you think. But I tried in the bill to strike the very balance you're talking about.
Great. We have a question from Adam, who asks about a value-added tax, a VIT, which Adam argues is the best way to fund universal health care. Many other developed countries have both VAT and universal health care. Senator, would you support the United States having a value-added tax and eliminating the corporate income tax? Or?
So what I would say, and I've looked at the VAT, as it's called, the value-added tax, at some length. Inherently, it's regressive. It hurts the lower and middle income person more than it affects the people at the top. Now, many thoughtful people have said, yep, we agree with Ron on that. It is regressive. So we'll exempt all these things. We'll exempt food and medicine and a variety of things. That, it seems to me, is an effort to try to come up with something workable. I've just never seen a proposal that really does that. And particularly the prospect of saying, okay, it's really regressive. Let's create all these exemptions. You're going to have an awful lot of red tape and bureaucracy. And I just envision these small business people. Oregon's a small business state. And I bet our listeners know small businesses have just had a belly full of red tape and hassle. One of the things that I'm glad I got done in this Congress is, the small businesses were about to lose their deductions associated with PPP loans. And if they had lost those deductions, they probably would have had to lay some people off in the middle of the pandemic. And I went to the Republicans and I said, this is just fundamentally wrong. And the small businesses that are hurting are going to hurt more. So I'm very sensitive to small businesses and rules and red tape. And I saw that in connection with the work I did to protect those small business deductions. By the way, the overwhelming PPP loans in Oregon were small. They were like $70,000 or less. No Ruth Chris folks, ripping off the program the way we all read about nationally when it was coming out of the gate. So, Nathan, I didn't catch the first name of the caller.
It was Adam.
Adam, if you'd be willing, we'd be happy to take a look at your research. And I'm just giving you my seat of the pants assessment. So if you have some information that you think makes your case, get it to us.
Terrific. Adam, I'd be happy to put you in touch with Senator Wyden's team. So we have a very specific question from Tony, who is Chief Inspector of an FAA repair station, who says Type 1 helicopters are being offered 11 USFS fire contracts this year. Last year, they were offered 48. Why were they reduced after the worst fire season in history?
You tell Tony I agree with him. And I have been following that very question up, that it doesn't make any sense to me after this horrendous fire season we had that they should be reducing these helicopters. And I'm spending a lot of time making sure that we do everything possible to not have a repeat of the last two devastating wildfire seasons Oregonians have faced. Now, getting that done means you got to have access to the tools in the toolbox, which includes helicopters. And by the way, I wrote the law to end fire borrowing. That was the practice where when the government was running short of money to put fires out, they would go borrow from the prevention fund, and then the problem would just get worse and worse. And I wrote that law to prohibit that. And it just seems to me, if you don't have adequate, helicopters, you're undoing some of the work that we addressed in terms of fire borrowing. And so we're all over the Forest Service and their staff, both with respect to the wildfire season and the helicopter situation. And Tony, if you get a phone and an email to you, we'll let you know what these agency folks are telling us in more detail. I don't think their answers have added up. I just don't.
Great. Well, thanks for raising that issue, Tony. So we have, I'm going to sort of combine a number of questions we've gotten about gas prices. Many of them are about the fact that oil prices seem to have dropped pretty substantially in the last couple of weeks, but most of us can't put a barrel of oil in our gas tank, and the gas prices don't seem to have reflected that. Is that something the federal government can play a role in correcting? Is this just market forces that are lagging? What's going on?
We do know that oil is a worldwide commodity, and that's a force to be reckoned with. But let me walk people through where I think the Congress can make a difference. Right now, today in Oregon, I think we passed somewhere where the price was around $4.70 a gallon, for gas, and the price will vary depending on where you are in Oregon. But Oregonians are getting clobbered at the pump, and then they go read the news and they see that the oil companies are making these astounding profits. And they kind of scratch their head and say, what's that about? Now, it's, Nathan, important to recognize in Oregon that it's not our little neighborhood gas station that's making all that money. It's the big oil companies. And there are two things that I think are relevant. One, the big oil companies are saying right now, we've got to have more chances to drill. They aren't even, Nathan, using their existing leases. In other words, they've got leases they can use right now, and they're not using them. And we've been asking questions about why not. Because I think if you're making great profits and then you're calling for more drilling and you haven't used your existing leases, something doesn't add up. Now, the big oil companies also enjoy very significant tax breaks. And it seems to me if this, continues, particularly not using the existing leases, then the big oil companies should have some of those lavish tax breaks rolled back and that money used to help Oregonians and Americans who are getting clobbered at the pump. And we're looking at that too.
Great. Well, hopefully that addresses most of the folks' questions. There have been some variants on oil and gas prices. And I think we'll take one last question and probably returning to connected to our opening question, which is about Ukraine. Judy from Ashland asks about the future and relevance of NATO in this current crisis. She doesn't elaborate too much more, but NATO being originally a Cold War era organization, and how do you see the role of NATO in this new era?
Well, it's clear that they and virtually everybody else is pitching in to isolate Putin. And I share the president's view. I think he's a war criminal. I mean, I watched, Nathan, that video that Zelensky showed in that dark auditorium. And I saw those pictures of the kids and the seniors. And I said, he's targeting them. That's murder. So NATO has proven to be stepping up in a very constructive way. Clearly, the president is very much aware of Article 5, which is the part that requires one member assist all the others, all the others assist the one member that's being attacked. And we've made it clear that we are going to do everything we can to not be involved militarily in Ukraine. The president said that's not going to happen. So there'll be plenty of time to think when we get past this, some of the opportunities for NATO in the future, I think what's important today, and as I say, I'm not going to get into anything classified. I think the NATO countries are stepping up and doing what the spirit of the agreement is all about, which is isolating Putin and autocrats who do what he's done. I will also say, Nathan, and I want to choose my words here carefully. If you ask me about the great threats going forward, cyber attacks are right up at the top of the list. And my concern is that we're going to have to, mobilize very aggressively to deal with cyber threats. You have lots of small businesses in Oregon that are very vulnerable to cyber attacks. And NATO and similar institutions are very constructive in terms of sharing information and experiences about how best to deal with that. And I'm not just talking about Russia, but I'm talking about a variety of countries and those that are very skilled in these technologies. And you can cause enormous amounts of damage to people in a way that people 30 or 40 years ago never thought of.
Well, thanks for clearing that up for us. So we have had a ton of terrific questions on every issue on the map. I want to thank everyone joining us on the Zoom, everybody on Facebook, everybody on YouTube. I know there's so many wonderful things to do on a beautiful Friday afternoon, but these conversations are so important for our democracy. And Senator Wyden, I'm sure they help influence the work you do.
Nathan, thanks for doing this. And Jackson County has come through again. Not a bad question in the House. And Jackson County, in particular, for me, kind of illustrates that everybody understands, because where I'm sitting now at the Medford Mail Tribune, we thank them for their public service and community journalism. Where I'm sitting now is 3,000 miles from Washington, D.C. And for a lot of Oregonians, the federal government might as well be Mars for all the contact it has with them. The questions that people raised today, whether it was broadband, whether it was forestry, whether it was healthcare, they're all issues that folks in Jackson County are looking at to try to get answers, bring people together, and to shorten that distance between Washington, D.C. and, say, the Applegate Valley on broadband. So we had a terrific presentation right at the beginning. And I said, Molly McCarthy and I are going to follow it up. So I really appreciate everybody in Jackson County practicing the Oregon way today. Not a bad question or suggestion in the House. And guess what? We have differences of opinion. Fellow just asked about VATs, value-added taxes. I told him what I thought. He told me what he thought. Nobody was shouting at each other. Nobody was screaming at each other. Nobody was threatening anybody. We're thinking about how to tackle big issues, and taxes is one of the biggest. And I described what I'm going to do next week, because I don't think residents of Jackson County with their tax dollars should be subsidizing the Putin war machine. So big thanks to Jackson County. It's been a long day after the sprint to get home yesterday, and I just appreciate everybody weighing in this way. It's a gorgeous day in the Rogue Valley, and I hope everybody gets out. And big thanks, everybody. God bless.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.